The US federal government now has 32 trillion or so in debt. Like, how do you think that impacts the investments the country needs to make?
Man, it seems like a very big problem. It's it's odd how it sort of has crept up on us. I think for decades people were saying that at some point all the government debt would squeeze out money from the private sector, that you'd end up with more and more of the government budget would be just interest on the debt or interest on the interest. There'd be some sort of runaway compounding. People were already making this argument in the 1980s in a sort of an anti-Reagan way, and then somehow the people who cried wolf, it felt like they were wrong for close to 40 years. And I think one of the reasons, if you sort of look at the history of why was the debt able to grow and it seemingly didn't matter, is that we also had a bull market in bonds, and the interest rates steadily went down from something like 20% in the early 1980s to basically 0% after 2008. From 2008 to 2021, we had sort of this a 13-year period or so of with maybe a small hiccup, but mostly just zero rates. And in a zero rate world, you can add to the debt, and the interest payments aren't that high. And so the annual cost of servicing the debt in 2021 was something like 1.6% of GDP, whereas in 1991 it was 3.2% of GDP.
Yep.
So I think that's sort of my explanation for how this thing.
And the interest rates were essentially significantly lower than GDP growth. So you had that kind of going for us as well.
Sure, but at this point, it feels like finally something broke. We're no longer in a deflationary context. The interest rates have spiked, the inflation has spiked, and I think we're headed for a very, very challenging decade. And I worry that sort of a lot of these arguments people made for 30 or 40 years have a lot of truth to them, and that once the rates are above zero, it's the crisis is here, and we have to figure it out. Probably one other thing that both helped and hurt the United States was that we were the reserve currency for the world, and so you could run bigger deficits than a normal country could. You could get away with it for longer, and then there's always a question whether at some point that means you're in a bigger hole, in a crazier place vis-a-vis things. I'm still so I'm when I look at the U.S. versus other countries, the conundrum I'm very struck by is that there are all these challenges in the U.S. and all these problems we face, and then it's very oddly still the case that almost everything else seems worse. And I don't know if that makes it stable and that this can continue, but that's
right. Is it just like relative matters? It's like the fastest person wins, and even if we're much slower, like it doesn't matter, or is it the absolute matters?
We're still the most dynamic society. We're the place where the innovations are still happening. I'd like there to be more, but it's striking how asymmetric it is. One metric I was looking at was companies started since 1990 that have market capitalizations over $100 billion. So brand new companies that have grown to being worth $100 billion or more. There are 17 in the world. 11 are in the US, 6 are in China, 0 everywhere else.
Amazing.
And so it's and then this is just the extraordinary failure of Europe, all these other places. And 5-6 years ago, there was some complicated debate of the U.S. versus China. And if you were the CEO of one of these 17 companies, you'd be so much rather be in the U.S. than in China.